We're going to start with a big debate tonight between two party leaders. One of them speaks 5 languages, including Dutch. The other one feels uncomfortable on a commuter train when he hears foreign languages. Which do you think is which?
It's so hard to tell, isn't it? I mean, no one sitting at home could have had any idea.
I had no idea. Yes, Mr. Farage and Mr. Clegg.
It was really funny, actually, as it started. They were both told, well, actually, the audience and everybody at home was told that these two men had absolutely no idea what the questions were going to be.
Right.
And you just thought, well, I'm sure
it's
they
on
can
Europe.
You
did, yes. Yes, but you were there. You were there.
Well, technically, I was in a kind of
you were in the spin room. You were in the spin room, OK, getting all kinds of jibber-jabber from Mr. Farage's people and Mr. Clegg's people. From what you heard, who do you think came out on top then?
Well, I think it's really interesting, actually, because I thought it was very close. Both of them had, up moments and down moments. And actually, probably Farage won, but that he kind of squeaked it. But this instant poll that we have out tonight has Farage winning by quite a large margin, actually, by 57 to 36. And I think probably what's very interesting is that the last time we had TV debates during the general election, Nick Clegg was the kind of man of the people, plain speaking.
He was the outsider.
Yeah, and he was able to kind of outdo David Cameron and Gordon Brown on that. But I think this time Nigel Farage has managed to beat him on that.
Sure. I mean, apparently in one of these polls, 1 in 5 Liberal Democrats thought Nigel Farage won.
Wow, that is interesting, yes. So they don't agree with Nick either. I absolutely agree with you, Kate, that Farage has stolen Clegg's outsider clothes and he's playing the underdog card for all it's worth. I mean, this fun piece by Esther Adley here in The Guardian said it's interesting because the UKIP has no more major experience of running anything in the UK than a town called Ramsey in Cambridgeshire with a population of 6,000 people. And Nick Clegg is the Deputy Prime Minister. Lord Heseltine said he thought it was a very bad idea for Clegg to almost dignify Farage with this debate. And I think lots of Lib Dems must have been nervous about it. But look at the figures. UKIP have got 30% in the polls going into May's Euro elections, and the Lib Dems are standing on 9%. Clegg has to do something to raise his profile, to make himself look statesman-like. He doesn't have to speak 5 languages, but he does have to prove that he's a statesman, and I think that's what he may have done tonight.
That's precisely the reason the Lib Dems went for it. They're rock bottom in the polls, and as you say, Kate, what happened in 2010 was he came across as passionate, he came across as a man of the people to a degree, also as well because he was the outsider. And the Lib Dems, he was perhaps hoping that some of that sheen would rub off tonight, but perhaps it hasn't.
Well, I think basically they had nothing to lose and everything to gain, and they just had to do this. And there was a kind of call at the end where Nick Clegg said, if you've never voted Lib Dem before, maybe give us a chance. Could equally have said, if you used to vote Lib Dem and you've given up
back,
on us,
please.
please
and
come
you're
back.
very hacked off about tuition fees, for instance, brackets, yes.
I mean, that was very interesting, actually. He made a real slip, actually. At one point he said, that people always had to read the small print. And he was talking about their kind of complicated ideas around EU referendums, but I think a lot of people will see that in views of tuition fees.
Yes,
and
that letter with the small print, Nick, that you sent to all voters, I mean, sadly that will come back to haunt him, I think, because people will see that as the most rank hypocrisy, and that may well be why they're 9% in the polls.
OK, I mean, Kate, there is another debate next week, so, he could pull it back out of the fire, Mr. Clegg, and be seen to be sort of, the man who won and all that kind of stuff. But was it a mistake then, given Nigel Farage's performance?
I'm not sure. It just might be a mistake given Nigel Farage's performance. It might be a mistake given what David Cameron and Ed Miliband decide to do, because what tonight proved was actually that 2 people debating was quite dynamic, it was quite quick, it was a lot more sensible in some ways than 3 people debating. And so if the upshot finally from tonight is that Nick Clegg ends up getting cut out of the general election debates, then I think they will see it as a massive mistake.
Is that a possibility? I mean,
certainly
you have to ask for 3, don't you?
No, certainly lots of... I mean, basically, the parties get to decide this themselves.
The parties decide, right. OK, well, the Lib Dems are going to say, Clegg's getting on the stage, aren't they?
And the Conservatives, certainly some of them are very keen not to have Clegg there. They think that, there's enough differentiation between David Cameron and Ed Miliband that they're very comfortable that they could win that. And they think that Clegg in the middle would kind of muddy the waters again.
OK, so if, James, if Clegg and Cameron Miliband and Cameron both said we do not want Clegg there, they can get away with that, right?
Yes, I mean, I think Clegg would probably try and take some action. I don't know whether he'd resort to legal action. I know that was mooted before the last election.
Yes, yeah.
But he would be spitting tax if that was the case. His coalition partner said, oh, sorry, mate, you're no longer powerful enough, my Deputy Prime Minister, to stand on the same platform as me. But I agree with you in terms of clarity. And in fact, the sort of old-fashioned, almost like a boxing match, the gladiatorial confrontation between two people, that's why the US presidential elections, those debates work so well. And when Ross Perot was in one year, it was much more muddied. And it felt much, and then the sort of ponderous thing of everyone being asked the same question, it felt much more laboured. So two mano a mano, because it always is ruddy men, isn't it, does feel a bit cleaner and clearer.
Interesting. All right, OK, let's move on to the Telegraph. James, let's go with the Times. The debate today, photograph of the two party leaders, the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Clegg, and Nigel Farage of UKIP. Whom do you think actually had more to lose by engaging in this? It was Clegg's idea, the whole thing.
It was Clegg's idea. He issued a challenge on LBC on his regular show, and many people thought it was a bad idea. Lord Heseltine said it's foolish to enter in this debate. As Deputy Prime Minister, he definitely had more to lose against a man whose party has only ever run a local council of 6,000 people in Cambridgeshire,
and has no MPs.
Against the Deputy Prime Minister. Dignifying Farage with a debate could be seen as a foolish idea. I mean, I always remember in the 1970s and 80s, Mrs Thatcher used to talk about you shouldn't give the oxygen of publicity to the terrorists. I don't agree with her in that case. And he's not a terrorist, obviously, but you shouldn't give oxygen of publicity to your opponents, is what I mean. And it may be that Clegg was giving him too much kudos here. Farage's aides have said he's been waiting 20 years for this opportunity. National TV and radio, 2 hits as well. He's never had so much publicity. Whether or not you agree with him, he's on the front page of all the papers. It's an absolute publicity bonanza for him.
And I agree with what you're saying about oxygen and publicity, but I do think the Liberal Democrats needed it as much as UKIP.
Well, yes, that's true.
And they just had to, and yes, he is the Deputy Prime Minister, but actually getting to kind of debate on this kind of level as the Liberal Democrat is actually not something that he gets to do that often. He gets to go to places and open things. He gets to stand in high-vis jackets.
And this is an issue that he's passionate about as well.
And it's an issue that they think they're very strong on as well. And they know that there's a certain amount of people out there in the great British public who agree with them. And what the polls show is lots of them aren't voting Liberal Democrat at the minute. So if they can just kind of harness them, they might get them voting Lib Dem again, get them over that hurdle. And maybe they might vote Lib Dem again and say, I don't know, general elections.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a reflection of the Liberal Democrats' parlour state in the polls as well. Absolutely, Kate. You've written an article for your paper. What does it say?
Well, I mean, it just basically says that we think Farage probably sneaked it. But it's interesting, a Snap poll suggests that he won by quite a large margin, actually, and kind of puts it kind of 57% to about 36.
OK.
And it's pretty difficult for Nick Clegg, actually.
I was going to say, well, I mean, what does he do now? There's another debate next week. What does he do to sort of turn the tide on this, do you think?
It's going to be very difficult. And it's going to, I mean, Snap poll is one thing. If, other polls come out in the next week that suggest that, yes, absolutely, this was definitely a win for UKIP, it's helping their opinion poll ratings, then I think they're probably going to have to think about maybe changing tack.
Clegg has to throw a sickie, doesn't he? Pretend he's got a sore throat.
Or walk in there smoking and with a good pint in his hand.
Yes, out Farage. I mean, his poll numbers, you're absolutely right, are terrible at the moment. Clegg, the Lib Dems are on 9% as opposed to 30% for UKIP. I mean, they're riding high. What I would say is he can play the statesman. He's Deputy Prime Minister. He's very eloquent. He's very smooth. I mean, he showed that in the debates in the last general election. He's certainly got presence on the podium. And Farage, apparently he did come straight from the pub. There was a picture on Twitter of him in the pub. He had a pint beforehand. He's still got a bit of that sort of, somebody called him the bruiser from the boozer. He's got a bit of that sort of saloon bar swagger about him. I remember, I'm that old, I remember the famous debate between Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, when Carter was just rambling on, and Reagan played the statesman. He just stood back and said, there you go again. And that was the moment that Reagan won that election. If Clegg can seem to be a bit aloof and above the more populist Farage, he might pull a victory out
But that's precisely what the public likes about Nigel Farage, isn't it? He comes across as honest. He comes across as not duplicitous, and I'm not suggesting Nick Clegg comes across as that at all, but he comes across as saying what he means and, you know, calling a spade is essentially, and that's part of the attraction, isn't it?
Absolutely, and he certainly did call a spade a spade. And the problem is, potentially Nick Clegg did too, in kind of letting the cat out of the bag. He basically said, on quite a complicated thing about where they stand about EU referendums, that people needed to read the small print of what Liberal Democrats say. Yeah. And that's just going to remind people about tuition fees, and it's just going to make people raise questions.
Indeed. OK, we're going to be talking about this next week after the next debate, so that'll run and run. Actually, last quick question about this. Some are suggesting this is the beginning, the real beginning of the general election campaign for 2015. Yes or no?
It's already started.
It's already started.
Yeah.
I must have missed that.
No, I agree. I mean, all this posturing they're doing about Labour's big announcement about are they going to have a referendum or are they not? Who knows? I mean, Ed Miliband may do, but I couldn't really understand it. There's certainly lots of posturing that indicates that we're already in the election race. I would agree.
Absolutely. All right. OK, staying with the front of the Times, Kate, pressure on Cameron to expel